So let's take a look at the Rex Brown signature bass sim from Joey Sturgis Tones. Okay, so let's go through one screen at a time and see what's under the hood of this beast and see what we got. Okay, so let's get started at the amp section here, the preamp. As you can see, it's kind of an emulation of Rex's original Ampeg amp, and side note, you really got to give it to JST for the graphics. On the original Bassforge being the Hellraiser, that one just looked really fantastic too, and this one, the visuals are just great. As you can see from here, the whole front end of it and just the attention to detail has been really well done. Quick side note, I also did a review and demo on the Bassforge Hellraiser. If you haven't seen that one, I'll info card that up top. Check it out. You're going to see a lot of similar items and workflow in between the two. So if you're familiar with that one, this one's going to seem real at home for you. So starting on the left, you've got, again, speaking of graphics, a really cool kind of item here. This is the main drive section. Going from clean to nasty, it starts out blue the further you are down, and his eyes light up more red as it goes into more drive. I'm using a bit of the distortion pedal in the beginning. It's not activated now, but for the tone I used in the demo, we'll get to that later. But dialed a little further down, your basic sound is going to be about here. As you bring it in, pretty aggressive tone. The thing I like about it is that there's still note clarity even when you really dial it in, which that can be a hard thing to get. A lot of times you just get a complete washout or it turns to mud, and even slammed all the way to the top, you can still really hear the notes coming through, and it seems to sit really well in a mix. So a lot of attention to detail was obviously paid. Now, going across the center, these are the usual graphic EQ marks from the Ampeg we're all familiar with. I kind of like the sound going straight in, so for this tone, I just bumped a little bit in the upper mids and in the 4 and 10K, just to give it a little bit more cut and clarity. Now, across over to the tone settings, this is labeled drive, but I think of it way more as your input gain. It won't add distortion until you really get up to the top. If you dial it all the way out, as you bring it in, so again, it gives some grind and some clarity and even a little bit of clank, but it's not really what I would think of as a drive or what you may expect out of that. Now, Thump does exactly what it sounds like, adds a lot of good deep low end. I have it cranked almost all the way up, but doesn't introduce mud. So that's the important part. All the way out. Bringing it in. Now, bark is basically a high-end spike. Or not a high-end, but an upper mid spike. Adds some sheen and clarity and gives some cut. I think of this one as if I'm just not getting what I need for something to poke through the mix, this is probably where I'd try and add initially first to see if I can solve the problem. So, dialed down. Bringing it in. And finally, we have contour. Contour is basically just your mid scoop, how deep or how shallow. I don't use very much of it for this sound. I kind of like having my mids present, but it's almost all the way down right now, so bringing it in. So you can go from almost zero to a fair amount of scoop in it. So let's bounce on up to the cab section. Now this one, just like the Bassforge Hellraiser, has the JST match cab. And just like with that one, I feel like this one is the best out of the pre-selected cabs. Has a really great amount of cut and clarity. It took me about a day to remember that this is actually an option opener. So know that it's there, and you can also jump up to an Ampeg 810 to match with the Ampeg emulation. And we got a section of mics here. You've got an Audix PR40 that you can use with it. Condenser U87. .421. And a sub kick. And again, just like with the earlier Bassforge, you have the option to bring in other impulses. I tried it out with a couple of Eden bass cab impulses that I have, and it really changed the tonal character completely. So I really like that this isn't that closed architecture, and you can bring in other items to utterly change up how the thing sounds and try carving out some really unique tones with it, and not just have what's originally in the box. So definitely liking that one. So we're going to go back to the match cab, and let's go to the EQ section first. Now, for here, this is what I feel like is one of the really important, and I'm really grateful for this section, is having non-preset EQ bands to effect with. Having the mid sweeps, high and low, and the shelves. It's for really getting the detail in and getting it exactly where you want it rather than a preset from the manufacturer is a big deal. So having the ability to set Q, the exact EQ point, and the amount of gain, just awesome. For the tone I'm using, I had a bump at 125 where I generally like in the low end, fairly even Q, and about 5 dB up. I bounced a little bit in 500 to give it a throaty kind of sound. Just popped it up by about 3 dB and about 2 dB at a sharp Q with about 1K for a little bit more cut and a little bit more girth in the upper mids. So then we get to the crossover section, which is, again, familiar if you know about the original Bassforge. It's pretty self-explanatory in that you have a gain and peak reduction that you can run compression or limiting on your low end and your high end, and your crossover point is set by this center knob. The thing that I find that's an important note is that this isn't just about your dynamics, that this is an important tone shaping tool, and I think some people may miss that. It can really have a profound effect on your overall sound just by how you set these and the difference it can make in setting the crossover at a point that filters out a lot of the low end going to the upper part and how you shape that. So it's about tonal color and carving out your sound, not just about dynamics control. So without changing anything, if I stay where I'm at right now, dropping it back, immediately thicker and warmer. Bring this up. Hear how much more shallow that is, how much more of the top end you're getting. That's a completely different tone. So don't miss out on the fact that you can add detail and tone shaping to this by using this thing and not just see it as a thing over or control over your dynamics. Now we're going to step back a little bit, and we skipped over the effects section. So let's see what we got there. Here, again, I found some interesting choices in that you've got a bass chorus that has two different sides to it. Well, they're the same thing, but you can set them at two different parameters. I kind of looked at it as a cool way to have maybe a more really pushed forward, heavily affected sound that I might use on the high end, and then also a set for kind of the low end, a more subtle effect that wouldn't destroy the intelligibility of the bass or just make it unusable in a mix. And you can do that by selecting as you do these. So let's get this on and let's try a lower speed and lower depth, something for the low end, and see how that sounds. It's a nice, fairly rich sounding chorus. It adds some brilliance and it doesn't rob from your initial tone. Let's try the other bank and try something more affected and use it up on the top end. Again, very cool. And it's nice having two sets that you can bounce in between for two different sounds and have them already ready and waiting for whatever part of the song that may call for it. So let's keep that on and take a look at the reverb. Again, reverb, not a real common effect for bass, but I know Rex has used it, especially when he got a little more experimental on some of their later albums and tried some different sounds. And especially if bass is standing out or is unaccompanied by guitar, having this kind of stuff can make it a bit more roomy, pun intended. And again, you get the cool red light up eyes. But I find dialing back the mix and keeping it fairly open sounding, you can give some atmosphere to the overall tone without destroying it. Again, reverb is real touchy with bass in a mix, but this one seems to do a pretty good job of it. So going back to something higher end. Really nice tone, really clear, and doesn't destroy the overall bass. So let's back on out of here and let's go back to the beginning of the signal chain and check out the last piece, which is going to be the distortion pedal. So At this time, this is during the pre-order stage, and I know they're still finalizing some stuff, so I know they're still going to be naming this pedal. I'm sure it'll have something real cool there, but that's why that center's grayed out here. But, so this is pretty self-explanatory. It's how most basic distortions and drive pedals are going to look. You're going to have your blend, how much dry and how much affected, the level, how loud you're hitting your amp. Here's the two places we really need to take a look at. Era, to me, is just a dark to light button. I kind of liked it up, but as you go back further in eras, you get that more older school, rolled off kind of high end sound. So the more modern being take it back. Bit warmer, bit thicker. And the drive, you can pull this all the way up and still keep it intelligible, which again, like I said on the preamp section, really important and really cool that it's not going to just absolutely fart out on you or go nuts. So I kind of like it just set in enough that you get some bite and a little bit of push into the preamp section, and I tend to like the era all the way up. So set somewhere about here going. So in conclusion, again, you can't go wrong with having something based off such a classic bass tone and one that's been so important in metal. But to re-emphasize, the open architecture and the amount of options really means you can really sculpt your own tone out of this and not be stuck with Rex's exact emulation. You can get a lot more out of it, and that makes this, at least for me, much bigger value on what you're getting out of it and what the possibilities are. So I recommend checking it out, and links below. Check them out. Go see if it's still on pre-order. There may still be a discount at this time, so you may be able to get in under that wire. But as always, like, subscribe, share. It definitely does help out. I've got some more stuff coming up, a full review on this beast, and a few other things. So check it out, and I'll see you on the next one.